Welcome everybody to my compression tutorial. I'm going to run through some of the basics of compression. So for this one, part one, the basic theory, I'm just going to run through some basic understandings with visual and audio feedback, as well as run through some of the different applications and etc. Uh, Compression. So, what is it? Essentially, it can be thought of as an automatic fader. Um, what the compressor is doing is taking an input signal, and it's depending on the settings of the compressor, will take that signal and change the gain or the level of that source, and then change it into an output source. Um, and yeah, so what you can do is shape the transients. So it'll shape over time the audio signal to produce or eliminate transients. And then you can start boosting. So like makeup gain, you can boost the now reduced signal, which will change the shape of that source. And the reason why you would change gain and shape it and all these different things is to smooth or balance the volume ranges of a single instrument. That's one of the most common things, is when we have an input source. So you're recording one channel. Let's say you're recording a kick or a snare drum, and you want let's say for a full song, you're doing a live recording, and you want throughout the whole song to have a fairly balanced level for that source. So you throw on a compressor, and throughout the song, if it gets really, really loud, the snare, let's say, it'll react to that and bring the volume down at a ratio of whatever you set. Let's say it's 4:1. So, and you set a threshold to when it starts to act and start compressing and changing the gain. So with all these different parameters, you can really start to shape the sound and get a nice smooth volume across a single instrument. Another reason why you would use compression is to reduce the dynamic range, which then in effect boosts the average volume. So the RMS, you're boosting the RMS because you're reducing the dynamic range between the whole instance. Like let's say this whole section here, which is I think 8 bars long. You can reduce the dynamic range, thus bringing up the RMS. That's typically done on either a stereo bus, or a 2-bus as it's called, or in the mastering process. And that's what's essentially going to give you the loudness in a mastering session. Another application for using compression, which is kind of more of a specialized way of doing that, is a de-esser. So it's taking a frequency range. It's not taking the whole signal. It's taking a small portion of the signal, which you can actually shape here. You can use a band pass or a high pass or whatever the de-esser settings are. Choose a frequency, so you could really shape which frequency section is going to trigger the compressor. So you can, let's say, set just this range, just from 2 to 10K, and then whenever that frequency hits a certain threshold, then the compressor starts acting. So this is very common to use on vocals for when the sibilants like p, p's, s's, s, stuff like that, all those harsh or harsher sections in the vocals, it'll compress it, thus saving you having to sort of manually somehow get rid of those annoying noises. So yeah, that's another application for compression. So the most common controls on a compressor are the threshold, the makeup gain, the ratio, the attack, the release, the output, and the meter display. And this one actually also has a dry signal that you can blend in with the processed or wet signal. And that's kind of useful for what they call parallel compression. This is basically a parallel compression in its whole unit. You don't have to send to a different channel. That's kind of getting more than what I want to. So I'll show you a basic visual and audible demonstration of this plugin working on a set of drums. So just a kick and a snare, and well, more than that, and some hi-hats and etc. I'll just play it here without the compressor on. So I'll just freeze this. So as you can see, this is the kick, snare. These are the hi-hats, these small ticks and the big tick. And I'll get another instance of this smexoscope. And this will be the compressed version. So with the compressor on, I'll just play it and I'll let you hear the difference. So this is pretty smashed. You could definitely hear the difference. And definitely see the difference. So what it's doing, I'll explain with these settings. So at 0 dB, at that 0 dB mark, it starts to react and start compressing. And it'll start compressing at 0.1 milliseconds at a 4:1 ratio. Once it has activated, it'll release the compression at 0.1 milliseconds and then prompt itself to compress again, which then it'll again just keep compressing on and off, on and off, on and off. And you'll see the needle dancing, and that's it reacting to the signal. The makeup gain is only 1 dB difference. So if, let's say, I have no makeup gain, you can hear it's even quieter now. Yeah. So I hope that kind of helps. I will also show you, because the ratio is kind of a little bit difficult to understand unless you have a visual feedback. This one kind of has more of a visual feedback. So when you crank the ratio, let's give me a sec here, right here. You crank the ratio, you can kind of see on this compressor a visual of what's going on here. And I'll just play this as well. So this is kind of like a visual feedback of the volume. So if there was no compression whatsoever, the ratio would be just 1:1. When a signal comes in and it hits this ratio right here, which is at minus 37.4, it'll start to shape and compress the signal at which is now 8:1 ratio, which means it goes like so. And right here, this is the dB range here. This is 0 dB, and this is lower. So it shapes that input to go quieter. The lower the ratio, the lower the slope. Thus, less compression happening. The higher the slope, the higher the ratio, the greater the difference. So hopefully that explains it. So I just kind of want to explain transients too as well, because I was using that term. First, actually, hold on here. I'll just get a fresh Smax. There. So this is the input signal. This is over time here, and this is the amplitude in dBs. So a transient is something that comes in really high. Actually, no, I don't think it has anything to do with volume wise, but it comes in very quickly and leaves very quickly. So just whoop, 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 like a kick or a snare or a hat. Basically all percussive elements are transient in nature, and that's what gives it that sort of percussive feel. And so what a compressor will do is shape it depending on how you set your parameters. So it'll cut off, let's say, over here, shape it, cut it down, and release. It'll change that shape, change its transient, and depending on the makeup gain and whatnot, it'll change a balance in between the beginning of the kick and the tail end of the kick. And that's why when you really squash it, you see it get more brick-like. Because it's cutting that top end and boosting the tail end. Eliminating, or actually not eliminating, sorry, reducing the dynamic range between the initial hit of the kick and the tail end of the kick. So, as brief as this explanation was, I hope it helped to explain quite thoroughly as to what a compressor does, how it works, and etc. If you have any questions or comments, just leave it in the comments section, and I'll probably address it as quickly as I can, and hopefully answer the question that you got as well. And like, as far as compression, I think it's probably one of the most difficult things to sort of get it in your mind and understand why it's useful and why you would use it in certain sections, like let's say on drums, why you would use it on drums and how you would set them on drums versus, let's say, a bass or a vocal or in the mastering process. Like, they all have their kind of different uses, but the basic theory or the essence of compression is essentially exactly the same. So yeah, hopefully that helps, and I will move on to the next section here, which is going to be an explanation of the different kinds of plugins and then their applications as well.